Good morning, Mr. Springer.
Good morning. And although I can say I think that the morning in Maui is a little bit prettier than the slushy, snowy Montana morning, but it's still a good morning.
It's chilly out, man. I got my hoodie on. That's how you
Yeah, I
know when
know.
it's cold.
What is it, about 65?
Dude, now it's like 52.
Oh, okay. Well, it's significantly below that here in Montana.
I'm sure, man. I'm sure. So, in case anybody out there watching doesn't know, when exactly did you assume the role of the carrier relations advocate?
January 1st. So it's
January.
been just a little over 60 days.
Okay.
Yeah, a little over 2 months ago.
So, the AGA had reached out to Mark and asked, dragged him out of RIA retirement and said, "Hey, man, we need some help in this area of advocacy." And it was clear that, we kind of looked at you and said, "All right, if Springer can't, nobody can." I think that was the consensus. And
I don't,
so,
I don't know
give
about
us,
that, but
give
maybe he's the only guy who's available and dumb enough to do this. Maybe
Yeah, it
that's
could be
what.
that too, right? Like I end up in that place. But if anybody out there doesn't know exactly what the position is within the RIA and kind of what your overall intention is, go ahead and talk a little bit about it and tell us, what it is and what you've been working on those first 60 days.
Yep. Yeah. So let's go back a little further, even, and just talk about the context of RIA advocacy and advocates, right? So,
Hmm.
when we started on this journey, which amazingly enough now is over 5 years ago, but when we
Hmm.
started on this journey in advocacy, it was really focused on, at that point, the existential threats that the industry was facing in the 2018, 2019 era. And so I think it's important for people to go back and think sort of to what that frame of reference was at that point. So
Yeah.
at that point we were in this post recession, pre-COVID era, where
Hmm.
we had seen this, starting really in, if we look at 2009, it certainly from the market perspective is the bottom, is this slow grind out that then, by 2014, 2015 started moving, the US economy was moving, and we started seeing these inflationary forces as prices normalized from a lot of the recession time. I mean, you could see it in the real estate markets, was where it was
Hmm.
really apparent. You had those bottoms where people were buying. Russ Palmer and I were just talking about this. Buying condos in Scottsdale, Arizona, for the price of taxes. Buying them for $18,000. Condos that today are over $1 million. That's how bad things were, right? So
Hmm.
we saw the U.S. economy come out of that, and things started to pick up steam. I remember in the kind of depths of the recession, I would have, as a restorer, these incredible opportunities to hire people in the construction trades that I never had before because they were just available. And so I was able to hire these really incredibly talented project managers and
Hmm.
superintendents and all these people because there just was nothing happening. But we'd come out of that, and we were starting to see pricing really taking this steep increase, not quite as bad as what we saw in COVID, but we saw the
Hmm.
precursor of that. But yet what we had in Xactimate was really from the period of time of 2015. That was really where we lasered in our analysis. 2015 to 2019, that 4-year period, we saw the price in Xactimate completely flat. And it was really for any area that you looked in the country, we saw this static pricing. I was finding in Montana, we had, it got a lot worse in COVID, but
Hmm.
pre-COVID, we had all of this sort of wealth transfer happening in real estate.
Hmm.
All these people, it's like the pre-Yellowstone effect. I mean, that sorry to all you Yellowstone fans, but that stupid show, you just made all these people want to move to Montana. And we were seeing, I mean, I think in one of the reference points I had was the price of drywall.
Yeah.
In Xactimate, the hourly rate for a drywall, not the worker's wage, but the retail hourly rate was like $37.87 an hour or something like that. It was high 37s, right? Our experience when we were actually hiring subcontractors to do that work, we couldn't find a subcontractor that was less than $100 an hour. Now, most subs don't work hourly anyway, but if you try to understand like what rate, if you're going out to do a patch job or the sort of stuff that we do in restoration services, how do we get that to an hourly rate? It was like 3 times what Xactimate was. So, we had this we were doing everything Xactimate was saying we were supposed to do, and the price wasn't doing anything. It stayed flat. It stayed static. That was one big issue. Second big issue we had was third-party consultants. We would have, a pretty large commercial drying claim, and let's just say that it's a $500,000 mitigation claim. So large, maybe it's a hospital, convalescent home, school, something like that. Large project. Consultant comes in sort of toward the end of the job. And they say, all right, we're going to apply all these. These are our policies, as if they're the adjuster, right? And they cut your bill in half from $500,000 to $250,000 and say, we can get you paid next week. Otherwise, if we can't settle for this number, like you're probably not going to get paid for 6 months. I'm like, this is like extortion, right? And then, of course, the third issue that we were really challenged with was the increase in rules and administrative requirements within the third-party administrator networks, right? And there was no offset for this, right? So every year you would go to the TPA conferences that sort of were like the de facto industry conferences at that point. And all you would hear is, you guys need to do more documentation, faster, cheaper, all this stuff, right? But you got to do it for less. And we're just drowning in this administrative burden that is sort of exponentially increasing. So as we saw these issues, our big concern at that point from an RIA's leadership standpoint was that, first of all, contractors were incredibly fragmented or fractured. The whole industry was just misaligned. And then there really was no voice for contractors. In some ways, I saw it as problematic that the de facto voice was the TPA. Sort of, whether we liked it or not, they were speaking for us. Same thing with Verus. Verus was sort of speaking for us, but the entire methodology was broken, right? Because if you followed Xactimate's rules at the time, and they say, well, you need to provide, upload your estimate. As soon as you uploaded your estimate according to the prices that you were observing in your local market, the insurance carrier says, you changed the price, change it back. And of course, they're uploading and supposedly validating the Xactimate price. And it resulted in, what we called this, I think Ed Cross might have been the guy, I can't remember who sort of coined the phrase, that it was the circuitous death trap of pricing, right? It's sort of this, if you did it in Excel, it would say broken circular function here. Or circular formula. So we really, at that point, set out to address those issues. When we were contemplating how we were going to address those issues, we had this thought that RIA needed to have someone who could speak on their behalf as an advocate. Anticipated that it would be advocates, plural, in the future at some point as we grew. But by design, we sort of took the whole issue of all the challenges we face with carriers and said, we're not ready to deal with that. We can't deal with that because we have such broad perspectives on how our RIA members view the relationship with the carrier. Some of our constituents have a very cozy relationship with insurance carriers. I mean, that's their primary lead generation source. Some, just the example of my company up in Montana, we went direct to the consumer. So we always wanted to have a cooperative and positive relationship with the carrier, but we weren't seeking that as our lead generation source. Right?
Yeah.
So we knew this. We knew kind of dealing with the carrier issues that we just don't have the bandwidth or the
Yeah.
credibility, frankly.
Yeah.
You and I talked a lot about this years ago. We didn't really have the credibility to even start there. So, a lot of good stuff happened with AGA. I think one of the things that's always difficult is if you have success in those areas, people forget the challenges, and that's sort of like, what have you done for me lately?
Yep.
Which is always a challenge. But there was a lot of progress made with Xactimate. RIA's relationship with Verisk and Xactimate is light years ahead.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
No question.
Verisk has been, I asked a lot of questions. I mean, I was the guy out there in the midst of that whole, we'll call it, season of debate and challenge, that's sort of going like, where's Verisk's alliance? Where's their loyalty?
Yeah.
I mean, we're owned by a bunch of insurance companies. I mean, is there something more nefarious here, right?
Yeah.
With pricing where it's suppressed by design, right?
Yeah.
And I think every restorer asks themselves that question.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
But really, in getting through, I spent hours and hours with the previous CEO, Mike Fulton and Greg Pine, and really got to know and understand what their business model is, how they view pricing, some of the challenges they have in their business. And kudos to them, they're a great partner, in helping us address some of those issues. So we've made light years of progress. Same thing with the third-party consultants. TPA's made some progress there. I think that's always going to be an interesting nut to crack. No question, it's improved. We validated the improvements through our TPA scoring systems that have been effective. But now it's this issue of, okay, we've solved for some of these problems, but now when we look at our members' top challenges, last year in the RI 2024 member survey, what are your biggest frustrations? Number 1, 2, 3, and 4 are all insurance carrier centric. They all deal specifically with that interface with carriers. So that's when it sort of reemerged as something we've got to deal with this.
Mm-hmm.
But then we get to, I think, your question. Thanks for giving me the opportunity to give a little background on that. But now it's the question, okay, what do we do about that, right? So that gets us to the current state.
So what's your role? Like, what's the design and intention of your role?
Yeah. So the first thing is, first is the issue of what is an RIA advocate. Ed's done a great job. I think, Ed said last year or last month, we had the AGA meeting down at ATI Restoration in Phoenix. And Ed got up on the stage and he said, I'm really so happy that we have a second advocate now. There's no way I could be the advocate because I sue insurance companies.
Yeah.
So that wouldn't work.
Yeah.
So that's some of where we ended up here. The approach with carriers is a little bit different than the approach that we have with a specific entity. So Verisk, that's a very different advocacy approach than what we're going to have to take with carriers, right? Verisk is a single company. Yeah. Verisk has half of their customer base in our membership. Yeah. So we have, just by the nature of our relationship, a vested interest in each other's cooperation, we'll say.
Yeah.
Carriers are a very different situation. The restoration industry there's a lot of different numbers that are out there. Maybe it's a $30 billion industry. Maybe it's a $60 billion industry. I've heard numbers in the hundreds of billions. I don't think that's accurate. If you just kind of do the math, and I don't know, what do you think? Have you ever done I know you work with a lot of restoration companies in your consulting role. Have you ever given thought to what the size of this industry is?
I have done some back of the envelope calculations, and what I have universally aligned on is it is far bigger than any one of us could ever assume,
Mm.
right? With our personal experience and knowledge.
Mhm.
And because really what goes unrecognized is all of the property damage claims that don't get done by restorers.
Yep.
And I think, as our industry has grown, we have taken on more of that market share. We've realized more of that market share, but I'm always very quick to say, hey, don't underestimate like who's doing what in your market, from janitorial to standard handyman, home remodel, and then the section of work that just gets done by facilities maintenance folks on their own. I would think that that's probably conservatively still 40% of the market. And so
we used to use a tool to help our sales and business development reps understand or comprehend the size of the available market and that's just Montana. Like, we're not in an area that deals with the storm work that you might experience in the Southeast or something like that, or the wildfires in California. I mean, we do have wildfires in Montana, but not like they do in California. But it is, to your point, it is much larger than anyone realizes. But however big we think it is, even if it's 100 billion, right? Which, if you took all the biggest companies that you've heard of, the Belfours, the ServPros, the First On, all the big companies, and added up all their revenue, you're less than 20 billion, right? And then you said, okay, then there's all the rest of the restoration companies. And then you say, 50% are just cashing out claims. You got all these other things. Let's just say it's 100 billion. The insurance industry, think of its size. What would you guess? What do you think the size of the insurance industry is in dollars?
Like, that would be almost like, I always try and put things in a national context just because my brain can't handle the rest of the world, because the rest of the world just kind of works in a different rhythm. And that's really hard to do with, the like reinsurance markets and everything like that. Like, it is globally connected. There's,
it's all together. And it all ties to the biggest financial epicenters in the planet as well. Most of the bond market is directly correlated to the insurance market, because all that premium that gets collected has to be parked somewhere, right? So then you've got the bond market, you've got the equity markets, but it's something over 5 trillion. Right. So what we're dealing with here is another analogy that's interesting. The restoration industry has really one trade organization. And let's just say there's a couple, right? Because I know there's some other groups that aren't formalized the same way that RIA is. But really, when you think about trade associations, I mean, there's RIA, there's a standards and certification entity. We're kind of overlap all that with IICRC, right? But really, there's one trade organization in RIA. In the insurance industry, there are over 130 different trade associations. So again, what we're dealing with is these enormous disparities in how we're represented, in how we're managed, how we're regulated. You think of the insurance industry, highly regulated, property restoration industry, not regulated at all. Right. So we have these big differences. So really, initially, a big piece of my effort is to do a couple of things. The very first thing is we have to be able to identify the area or areas, but I used it singular intentionally, right? Initially, for two reasons. We got to find the areas where we have alignment that is either singular or very narrow, right? Because of that other challenge that I already expressed. And that is, within our constituency, we have a very broad perspective on how a company ought to engage with a carrier.
Got it.
Right. So what's a trade association's role in this? Well, it has to be very specific, right? Because if we take a very nuanced approach to this that only represents a segment on either side of the spectrum of this issue.
Mhm.
All of this unification and voice that we're endeavoring to build in this very, very small fraction of a much larger industry that we're a subset in
Yeah.
becomes imperiled, right? Because if we on either side of the spectrum alienate the other side, we're
Mhm.
not going to have any voice at all whatsoever.
Yeah.
So we've got to identify where is that area of common ground. I remember a number of years ago talking with Matt Preston about this. Matt's not on RIA's board anymore. He was on our
Mhm.
board for a number of years. He was also a senior VP and chief legal counsel at ServPro.
Yeah. Good
That
dude.
was a great partner with
Mhm.
RIA, and he brought sort of ServPro's involvement, which was really important because ServPro historically was not involved with RIA, but now they've been a great partner. Now they're on that one end of the spectrum that's very focused on the relationships they have with carriers.
Yep.
So that's one perspective we have to sort of view in this whole process. But Matt brought this perspective, and I think it's instructive for everyone. When he was prior to the time that he was at ServPro, he was the chief legal counsel at Yum Brands. Yum
Mhm.
Brands is the parent company of Pizza Hut, Taco Bell, and Kentucky Fried Chicken.
Mhm.
So you can imagine, however competitive you think it is in the restoration industry, take that times a gazillion for the fast
Yep.
food industry, right? And he said this, he said, we competed like crazy with McDonald's and Wendy's and, all these other brands that were out there. But the trade association for the fast food industry was so important because there were a few areas where all of us
Yeah.
recognize we have alignment on these issues. If we don't, as an industry, get serious about serious challenges with consumer protection, food
Mhm.
safety, regulation, we're
Yeah.
going to get decimated, right, by all these
Yeah.
other special interest groups. So they found tremendous success in those identifying those areas of alignment. So that's really been some of my efforts. I've had, um, pushing 40 different interviews with um, company leaders of all sizes, small little restoration companies, medium-sized restoration companies, big national companies, where I'm talking to them about where do you see the biggest challenges right now that relate to carriers? And how do you, from your vantage point, see opportunities for us to solve these problems? A couple of things have emerged. One is restoration companies are taking longer and longer to get paid. It
Yep.
almost seems like it's every year about 10 days
Yep.
added to the amount of time it takes to collect. Some people measure this in days of AR aging, some measure it in DSO, days sales outstanding.
Mhm.
Excuse me, whatever the metric is, we know this. It's increasing rapidly.
Yeah.
Back when I sold my company back in 2020, our DSO was just over 30 days. I think it was 33 days,
Yeah.
which is pretty good, right? That's
Yeah.
pretty respectable number. Now, granted, our company again was sort of direct to consumer, so we weren't on a bunch of programming. The programs are tough in Montana because there's not enough claim volume. It's
Yeah.
such a
Yeah.
rural state, but it was still decent revenue, still 20 million plus revenues that we're putting through there. And we were managing a DSO at just over 30 days. In the cost of doing business survey that just came out, so that was 5 years ago, the most
Mhm.
recent cost of doing business survey indicates the industry average is over 80 days now.
Yep.
Commercial companies, as I've been exploring this issue, companies that have a commercial focus or their largest
Mhm.
kind of sector of their business is commercial, 150 days. I mean,
Yeah.
Anthony, I'm like, wow, how can you run and operate a company when you have to at the same time sort of be a de facto bank? I mean, it's
Yep.
just it's unsustainable, right? So as we identify, that's one of the biggest issues. The other one that sort of goes hand in hand with that is the issue of claim cycle time. So not only is it that it's taking forever to get paid, it's taking forever to close files.
Hmm.
It's taking forever to communicate with the insurance companies. All sorts of anecdotes about that. But what I found here, and I think some of our opportunity in this issue, is that while I think a lot of restorers may feel that it is in the insurance carrier's interest to delay payment as long as possible, that's sort of, I think, what we intuitively
Hmm.
identify as the root here. It's actually really not the case, right? Because when you look at an insurance company, they've got within their variable costs, really the only one that they have a lot of control over, or any control at all, really is their loss adjustment expense, right? What does it
Hmm.
cost us to adjust this claim? Well, if this claim is taking, let's say on the commercial extreme, 150 days, their
Hmm.
cost is exponentially higher, their controllable cost, than it would be if they could narrow that. The other
Yeah,
issue the
totally.
carrier has in that is the longer it takes to settle the claim, the higher likelihood they have that their client, the policyholder, is going to change their carrier,
Yep.
right? Now we know this, roughly speaking, it's 4 times harder for anyone to acquire a new client than it is to retain an
Yep.
existing. So we think that there's two areas with the carrier that they're apt to have a voice or a kind of give us an ear as we sort of try to solve this problem, because we got to get paid, they got to settle claims quicker.
Yeah.
It's in both of our interests to collaborate here, and so that's sort of what we're working on initially. Now, there's a whole bunch of paths that we can get into as to how we get there for that, but that's sort of the issue that I think, regardless of where you're at in your business model, that affects you absolutely. Don't care if you're ServPro or if you're, um, sorry, I'm having a total brain cramp of the restoration company you used to work for in Hawaii.
Premier.
Premier. I wanted to say
Yep.
Pinnacle. I'm sorry. If you're Premier Restoration, which is a local company in the state of Hawaii, they don't work outside of Hawaii, do they?
No.
Yeah. So, or I'll just use my company. If you're ServPro or Dayspring and anything in between, those issues affect us all.
So, look, man, I'll ask this question. So, if, like, let's say I, let's make an assumption that I believe you and that these assumptions are correct. If the delay in claim resolution is getting carried out and it's not because of nefarious intent or a carrier's willingness or lack thereof to settle the claim, right?
Mm-hmm.
And carriers have a vested interest in resolving things faster. Why are they taking longer?
Mm.
Like, and I get it, we're speculating, but I can't, like, that's an itch I got to scratch, man.
Yep. No, and I think that there are several contributing factors. So we're good. This is purely speculation, right?
Totally wild.
Well, let's just, this is a thought experiment. Okay. There's two perspectives in this issue, right? If you are on the restoration company, and this was my frustration, right? We had a lot of challenges with insurance carriers, and there's a big spectrum of the carriers we interact with. Some carriers were awesome to work with,
Mm-hmm.
right? I mean, very responsive to their clients, adjusters that were the consummate professionals, right? The other end of the spectrum, there's plenty of carriers that were challenging to work with.
Yeah.
I mean, they were unresponsive.
Mm-hmm.
They were the way that they would respond to estimates was just unprofessional, right? It was a
Yeah.
response to an estimate that was submitted by a claims professional that was not experienced in the trades in any way, shape, or form.
Yep.
Went to a very brief amount of training, and now is supposedly going to tell my project manager or estimator who has 25 years of experience how to build a home when I'm really not sure that they could even paint a wall.
Yeah.
Right. So big spectrum. All right. Now, on the other side if I put myself in the carrier's shoes, I've got an equal problem on the other side. So while on the carriers, you've got the spectrum of professionalism and quality of carriers, you've got a big spectrum of quality and professionalism and ethical behavior on the restorer's side, right?
Yep.
So for a season of time, I used to do a lot of work as an expert witness. I'd get called by sometimes insurance companies, but a lot of times various attorneys in the Pacific Northwest that would say, hey, we got this claim. We need you to look at it. It's a big dispute, right? So I'd come in and take a look at it. And Anthony, it's pretty crazy. I mean, I'm assuming you've probably done the same. I'd look at an estimate and I'm like, okay, first of all, this estimate's sloppy. Second of all, there's no documentation to provide any evidence that this needed to be done. You see things like, an air mover in a claim for 36 days.
Yeah.
Right. And there's nothing to substantiate that air mover was needed for 36 days. And here's a bigger problem. An air mover in there for 36 days to dry a wall assembly that if you just remove the sheetrock on would be about $100. And now I've got a $3,100 rental for an air mover that costs $275. And I'm sitting here going, as if I'm just a consumer, why does that make sense? Right?
Yeah.
I mean, I was talking with some people down at the AGA event last week or 2 weeks ago in Phoenix. It's legitimate for a consumer at the end of a restoration claim, when they're presented with a $15,000 mitigation bill, to say, why didn't you tell me it was going to cost this? If you would have told me it was going to cost this, I would have torn out my 30-year-old carpet and $500 worth of drywall and replaced it all with new, rather than pay for a fraction of the cost, rather than pay $15,000 to dry carpet that's 25 years old.
Yeah.
Right. Restorers can sometimes be our own worst enemy. Right. There's a couple areas that I think, as I have all these conversations with people who, again, want to see our industry represented professionally. We see a couple troubling trends. One is, and Ed Cross, his entire presentation, I shouldn't say his entire presentation, a significant part of his presentation at the event, and the primary emphasis of Andy McCabe's presentation, which Andy is, sort of the guy that spearheaded the whole Restoration Rebels movement and has, been a very staunch advocate for contractor interest. His position in the presentation that he had, and Ed's as well, is that we as an industry do a very poor job in communicating expectations to our customers about what the cost of the claim is going to be. It's very difficult for Ed to defend a restoration contractor who has a one-page worth authorization that says nothing about what this project is going to cost.
Yep.
I mean, that's not a legal contract. And we're our own worst enemy when we have, all of these people that go to a couple-day WRT certification course. Now they're newly minted as a restorer. They go out, they create significant invoices of questionable economic value, and then tell the insurance company, this is my pay it.
Yeah.
Right. We have in our industry an enormous cross-section of unethical behavior, right? And it relates to improper communications and expectations on contracts. It relates to the second issue, and I know that I'm going to ruffle some feathers when I say this, right? But it relates to the issue about how we deal with our subcontractors, okay? Because what's happening is we've got situations commonly where restoration contractors have two different invoices for the work that's done from their subcontractors. One that sometimes is significantly higher than what the market price would dictate, and then a second invoice that they're paying off of. Now,
Mhm.
I'm going to defend a restorer's ability to have early pay discounts till I'm blue in the face, right?
Mhm.
In Montana, I bought a lot of Shaw carpet.
Mhm.
I was at one point I bought more Shaw carpet than anybody else. Because I did that, I got great payment terms, okay,
Mhm.
based on the volume and based on our own financial practices and how fast we got our bills paid. All right.
Yep.
That is my benefit. If I choose to pass that along because it creates a competitive advantage for me, that's my choice. If I choose to take advantage of that so I can fund all this cash flow, that's my choice, right?
Mhm.
As long as it's transparent. This behavior that happens in our industry with dual invoices, one that you pay, one that's presented to the insurance company, it's wrong. It's unethical and it's fraud. Okay.
Yep.
People have spent time in prison for that, and it happens, and it's got to change, right? We've got to change that. Last issue that's a big problem is we've got these issues of these exponentially increasing lead generation referral fees, right? When I was in
Mhm.
Phoenix, I heard about $2,500, any
Yep.
size water loss, $2,500 referral fees that restoration companies are paying to plumbers. $1,500 loss, they pay a $2,500 referral fee.
Yep.
Their hope is they're going to get enough of those that are so big and fat that it pans out in the end, or they build it into the invoice.
Mhm.
But this is a big problem, right? I mean, this is a race to the bottom in our industry. And I don't think that the consumer would be okay with that if we were transparent and disclosed that, right? I wouldn't be okay with that if I had that person working in my home. So I think that, again, the root issue here is dual. We had two issues. We
Yep.
have insurance carriers that are not always ethical and honest, and we have restoration companies that are not always ethical and honest. Within both of those industries, there are honest, transparent, ethically grounded organizations. Our opportunity, from my perspective, is that the ethical, honorable restorers need to collaborate with the honest, ethical carriers to determine how we ethically move forward as an industry. We do not have strong ethical standards. We do not have any sort of way to handle dispute resolution within our industry, and we have very poor training on this issue. Therein lies what I believe is our biggest opportunity.
So if I my original question is, why are claims taking longer for the carriers when they have an incentive to pay them sooner? We started cutting trail down this road. So is it that, from your perspective, is it the fact that, look, there's been an increase in unsavory and unethical behavior on behalf of the restorer, which has precipitated in a much greater need for oversight in the review of invoices?
Yeah, and I think we see that in just the third-party review companies
Yeah.
that are popping up all over the place, right? I mean, you've got a challenge with the carrier when they see these cases of poor economic value that's being
Yep.
foisted upon the consumer. And that starts to orient their paradigm, the way they look at their claim settlement, right? I mean, it's the same
Yeah.
thing as you think of, sometimes the cliche about, police, they start to see everyone as a criminal because they deal with that bad
Yep.
subsection. We're still most people follow the law and obey the
Yep.
law, right? But if you're a policeman, you have this alternate reality of who you're dealing with. And I think that applies to the carrier. Therein lies, I think, our greatest opportunity right now as an industry is to provide leadership on this issue, especially thought leadership, right? Because no one's
Yep.
talking about it. No one's dealing with it. I asked at the AGA event, there's about 125 people there, said, how many people could tell me what the RIA ethics code of ethics is?
Yeah.
I just, someone tell me. I should have brought like a $50 bill or something like that and said, anyone who can tell me 1 point, no one look at your phones, anyone who can tell me one of the 7 points from the RA code of ethics gets this. I
Yeah.
don't think anyone would have won.
Well, first, if referral fees are 2,500 bucks for plumbing leads, it'd have to be bigger than a $50 bill. Let's be
Yeah.
honest.
Yeah. Maybe I'd
And
have to bring a Bitcoin, right? Be like, someone
yeah,
gets this $80,000 Bitcoin. Again, the point is this: we don't know what the ethical codes are. In fact, RIA's code of ethics was adopted in 2006. There was not $2,500 referral fees in 2006.
oh yeah, for
It
sure.
didn't happen. Okay. A lot of the issues we're dealing with that there's so much more information about weren't happening then. Okay. So, we've got to go back to the basics to say, are we as an industry agreeing to the right things? Number one. Number two, how do we train consistently to that? We've completely lost that. When I went to the CR program in 2002, most of the first day sitting under Marty King was dealing with RIA's CR code of ethics, okay, and practical case studies related to them and role play on ethics. Where does that happen? I mean, I've challenged RIA's education committee on this issue. I'm like, where are we teaching people practically what it
Mhm.
means to be an ethical restorer? No one knows. I looked at IICRC's website to try to find their code of ethics. It took me almost 30 minutes to find the IICRC code of ethics. It's buried
Mhm.
on a subpage of a subpage.
Yeah.
We as an industry are doing a very, very poor job of this. Now, here's the difference. Insurance industry, highly regulated. Okay. They have to do this stuff.
Yeah.
The insurance property restoration industry, I mean, one of the CEOs of one of the big companies says, until we can solve for all the pirates and cowboys, we're going to have a problem. So I kind of use his moniker, the pirates and cowboys. How do we deal with the pirates and cowboys? What ultimately is going to happen is we're going to be regulated from the outside if we don't police our own internally. Now, I'm like a total libertarian, right? I
Mhm.
believe in free markets. I believe the free
Yep.
market should regulate itself. So I want to see us as an industry get serious about these things, have a serious dialogue about how we solve for these things. Bring the insurance carriers in to solve for this one issue. There's a bunch of other areas we're not going to be able to solve for because we have too broad of opinions on it. But I want to see us start to do this internally because I would much rather have that than the state of New York or the state of Montana,
Yeah.
the state of California, or whoever it is saying this is how you're going to behave, because those consequences are not anything I think that would be in our best interest.
Got it. So rapid fire. Next 6 months for you in this role. What are you going to do?
Yep. So the very first step is getting alignment again around these biggest issues. And so I'm talking to everyone I can about how do we as an industry provide thought leadership on ethics, because I believe this is the way. It's the only path. I mean, thinking about this nonstop for the last 90 days. It's the
Mhm.
only path I can see to having a meaningful dialogue that actually gets us to an outcome that everyone can see as positive directionally. Okay.
Got it.
Otherwise, it's just going to be us all throwing mud all the time. We
Yep.
can't take our statement, take Mark Springer and say, Mark, go out to State Farm's headquarters in Bloomington, Illinois, and advocate for this position statement. I mean, I won't even get the tip of my toenail through the door at State Farm's
Mhm.
headquarters for that. But if we can talk about the root issue, why is it taking so long to get paid? Right? Because we know this. If we take the carriers at their word, and I'm not saying it's always true, I know there's carriers that are paying slow because it's a business strategy. Okay.
Mhm.
But that's not across the board. I know it's not across the board because I've been able to talk about them. They say it's not, and they've given me evidence why it's not. I'm going to take them at their word for now on that.
Mhm.
Okay. And I'm going to say this. Okay, if we solve for that, if we can address this as an industry, and if our opportunity is to do a good job within our industry in aligning around the way that a business should be ethically operating itself in integrity and in a way that's sustainable, if we solve for that and do that, we've completely removed that issue and we've made progress. So, number one is we've got to update and we've got to make sure that our code of ethics is relevant. Okay. It doesn't address those issues that I already mentioned. So I'm already, as you know, you're an RIA board member. I'm challenging RIA's board to take their outdated 20-year-old policy and bring it up to date. Step one. Step two, we need to do this collaboratively in the some of our IICRC's leadership the other day about this. We need to do it with them too. We need alignment here. Step two, we need to engage the carriers and get their feedback on this. Okay. Listen, you guys have all these complaints. Help us out. We're going to take care of this issue. We want you to provide feedback for us. Okay. But as we do that, then what we're asking you to do is help us with how we internally police this. Now, the board, RIA's board, is going to have challenges as it contemplates having an ethics review board. I recognize that that's thorny, but I'm going to say that, make a bold statement. If we don't have an ethics review board for this, there will be no teeth, and we will just have there's got to be an enforcement mechanism. Again, from my perspective, in the free market self-policing side, rather than the regulatory external side. Okay. So I think we got to do that as an industry. Step four, we have to develop a way that restorers can provide thought leadership on ethics for all of its constituency. Enormous opportunity for RIA to equip its members. In a lot of our members already teach CEC courses, to provide the content to our members so that they can deliver this in their local marketplace in a consistent way, how we are providing leadership on this issue, and can also instruct them in the areas where they have to be able to provide ethical claims handling to expedite this. Again, the reward is significant. Insurance companies decrease their cost and they retain their customers. We get paid faster. Everyone can win here if we start talking about this and we start finding instead of just lobbing mud from both sides.
And so last question, because both you and I got to go, but I'm going to ask it. This is going to take some time.
Yep.
Let's make the assumption I'm an ethical restorer who's doing most of the things right. What do I do in the meantime to make sure my business doesn't die because of payment cycles?
Yep. So the big thing that restoration companies have to do is they have to make sure that they are masters of setting the expectation with their customer for payment to ultimately drive down their DSO. It's still possible. I've talked to companies that have relatively low DSO. They have mastered communication in their contracts, how they communicate about their contracts, and how they work with their customers. Okay. You've got to do a good job there. A lot of restorers that complain about this need to look in the mirror and say, how can I get better in this respect? So that's a big area, I think, that's important, and a big area of opportunity that we internally have to be really serious about. And that's where I would start.
All right. Typical RIA Facebook Live fashion. I always ask, what's one question you might have for me? You got one
question I have for you. Like, how do you feel that it's on this whole topic of ethical? How do you think it's ethical to start my morning out by sending me a picture of beautiful Maui and talk about what a great day it is when you know I live where I live? I just want to know what's going through your mind. Like, what was the upside there?
Bro, it was no more complex than I experienced some joy when I walked out on my back deck and wanted to share it with a buddy.
Oh, that's awesome. It's such a beautiful place that you live. I'm definitely glad that you have that joy there, and appreciate all you do for the industry. Anthony, doing these Facebook Lives is a huge service to the industry to help us. Thank you for helping us get the word out, and all that you do from your end to make this ecosystem a better place.
Thank you, likewise, Mark, for your leadership, both in thought and in action. And I look forward to seeing you in West Palm.
Oh, I know. People need to come join us there, be a part of the discussion.
Absolutely, man. Thanks for your time.
Yeah, you too. Thanks so much.